first seeing his photographs. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin Alter to make an introduction.
Perhaps architecture's greatest photographer, in a conversation with Larry Speck, Austin's most accomplished architect and most decorated faculty member of the School of Architecture. So I hope you're all ready for a real treat. Forgive the length of this, but there are a couple things I just have to say. You should know a little bit about Julius Shulman. He was born in 1910. And I understand became an architectural photographer at a kind of chance meeting with Richard Neutra, a little-known architect in the United States. And between just like 1936 and 1986, for that 50-year period, Shulman completed over 6,000 photographic assignments, mostly in North America.
8,000.
8,000, okay. Your bio has it wrong in the book. I mean, 6,000 was more than 2 a week for 50 years without a break. 8,000 would add another, 60% on top of that. He's been busy, shall we say. He's won countless awards. It really doesn't make sense to count them all now. It would be the whole time. But just to say, in '69, he won the AAA Gold Medal for architectural photography, and is an honorary member of the AIA. He is perhaps most widely known for his black and white photographs of Pierre Koenig's case study House 22, which is on the poster, and I'm sorry that we cropped it. And Kaufman's 1947, Richard Neutra's Kaufman House of 47. They became the icons of post-war life in California and the touchstones for probably the best aspects of American post-war architecture. It was and is through his photographs that modernism in America was disseminated and understood. They defined what I would say is the best aspects of the movement, and it was through Shulman's keen eye that we came to understand what was moving about the field. Let me be clear, photography is not an objective document, it is not about objective documentation. In addition to all of that kind of technical prowess that a photographer might possess, his work is in a large part that of an editor. Framing certain views, including certain aspects of an environment that are that's part and parcel of a photographer's efforts. And the right light, the contrast of materials and textures, the relationships between spaces and the outdoors, all this is defined and recorded by the photographer. This is a bit of preaching to the crowd, but I think architecture is important. It's important because it sets the stage for living. It frames and affects our lives through the environment it creates. But most private buildings, even those by famous architects, are personally experienced physically by really relatively few people over the course of their existence. Rather, it's through their publication in photographs that many of these buildings have their greatest effect and influence on the design, of subsequent buildings. This is where Shulman is most important. It's through his work, more than any single architect's, that American modernism was defined. He showed us an architecture that ennobles, that invites the delightful experience of the world around us, and revels in the play of light over the course of the day, the dynamism of intertwining forms, inside and outside. He showed us people, real people in his photographs, not just empty buildings, and helped us imagine the pleasures of modern life as it was lived through modern architecture. I would say that his work sets the standard against all other architectural photographs are measured, and indeed the qualities that we know from his photographs set a similar standard against which architecture accomplishment is measured. A few years ago, I had the great privilege of introducing my friend Pierre Koenig to an audience in this room. I remember holding up this photograph of a book that was about to be published at the time, and he presented his extraordinary work at that time. And I remember holding the photograph up of Case Study House 22 and explaining that it was his work that had captured architecture's possibilities in my imagination and gave me continual faith in its pertinence. But truth be told, I didn't actually know Pierre Koenig's work firsthand until I was already a fan. It was really through the qualities I saw in Julius Shulman's photographs of his house that I found architecture's great pleasures. And in perusing Shulman's archive of work, I think one will find an endless fountain of inspiration for the further study and practice of the field. There are many places you can, in fact, you can barely turn over a rock and not see his photographs. There's a book not so many years ago that was published about his work. There are many other things published about him. It's a huge honor, and it's worth saying that tomorrow night is the opening of, Larry mentioned, so you guys know about the documentary. So with that, please welcome Julius Shulman and Larry Speck.
ask questions only, and I'm going to keep them really short because I want to hear what Professor Shulman is.
Dr. Shulman.
Dr. Dr. Professor. Oh, 3 doctorates. Wow. That's fast, all in 1 year. So I want to know some personal things at the beginning here. Tell us where you were born and where you grew up and what your family was like.
Being born is my mother's responsibility. I was born in Brooklyn, New York. When I was 3 years old, 1913, in case you don't know, my birthday, my mother was very smart. She selected 10, 10, 10. That's my birthday. Brooklyn, New York.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I had a party last week, it was good. When I was 3 years old in 1913, do you realize how old you're getting to be here? You realize 1913, when I was 3 years old, my father decided he wanted to become a farmer. So we went from Brooklyn to Central Village, Connecticut. Connecticut's way out yonder on the east coast of kind of New England. And for 10 years, until I was 10 years old, my father planted corn and potatoes, and my mother milked the cows, cooked on a wood stove, pumped water from a well, no telephones, no indoor plumbing. It's so strange, to answer your question. I could sit here and recite things like, for 7 years, UCLA and Berkeley in California, I was not a student. I just all of the classes, because I could find nothing at the university which would instill in me the desire to do anything but bum around. This is one of my books. Notes. I've got somebody here from Oklahoma. You know Oklahoma? The people beat Oklahoma the other day. In Oklahoma, there's a great epic of the work of Bruce Goff.
Price House.
I met Bruce Goff while I was lecturing at Oklahoma, and it's fascinating to realize what a coincidence occurred today. In Oklahoma, I was asked by Bruce Goff to photograph the model of a wonderful chapel that he had designed for the campus. A member of the board of directors, I'm sure he was a Republican, he had to say no. Bruce Goff designed a magnificent building. He had the model of it, which had been turned down by the board of directors and the trustees of the university because it was too modern, they said. Today, I had an occasion on the campus to have a short tour of some of the buildings, and much to my delight, after I learned that modern architecture is taboo here on the campus, we found that there were exposed to me at least 3 or 4 rather contemporary buildings. If you know how to spell it, I don't. But the point is, what a strange coincidence, that one of the trustees of the board of directors, whatever his title was in Oklahoma, he didn't allow Bruce Goff to design his chapel. Steel framework, elegant, magnificent design. Fortunately, I photographed a model of it for Bruce Goff as a demonstration in the class of photographers and architects and likewise.
So did you photograph other Bruce Goff work? Built work?
Considerably, oh yes. Bruce Goff and I were friends. By the way, I had a meeting up at my studio. I gave a class every Saturday with some of the architectural students at the University of Southern California. And Dean Timmy introduced me to the audience, the students in my studio, commenting about the fact that I was going to talk about some of the more prominent architects in my life. I began my work in the 1930s, before your parents were even born. Is anybody here with a beard? No one yet. So I was living there in a house and studio designed by Raphael Soriano. Dean Timmy of the USC introduced me with a comment that I was going to talk about such early architects as Gregory Ain. There's no show of hands. I couldn't get anyone when I was introduced to make a comment. Yes, we're familiar with Gregory Ain's work. A-I-N, in case you don't know it. Gregory was a remarkable architect. No one in my class knew Gregory Ain's name. It's a sinful, dastardly, horrible neglect. Until one student from visiting USC from Germany said, Mr. Shulman, in Hamburg or wherever, Dresden, wherever he learned, everyone worshiped Gregory Ain's work. Here is a class at the University of Southern California, one of the prominent schools of architecture. No one knows Gregory Ain. He said openly and strongly, damn it, what's wrong with you guys? What is wrong?
People don't look around in their own backyard.
It's in their front yard, not in the backyard.
So tell us about your house by Raphael Soriano. Do you still live in that house?
58 years.
Uh-huh. And is it the same now as it was then?
It's a cultural heritage board monument. Never changed.
Uh-huh.
There's nothing to change. Because Soriano and I were good friends. I met him when he was doing his first house in the 1940s. We became very good friends because we found we had a lot in common. Unfortunately, many architects design for themselves. And as Lloyd Wright said to me one day at Taliesin West, Mr. Shulman, tell me more about Neutra and Schindler and some of the early contemporary architects, many of whom I met as they came across the United States to visit me at Spring Green, Wisconsin, or Taliesin West. Tell me, how do these architectural students and the architects themselves relate to their clients? Then he continued by saying, I can't stand my clients, they get in my way. Here's the great Lloyd Wright, to my knowledge and to my experience and feelings. Wright was and still is the greatest architect we've ever known. There's no question, not in my life. And I've known them all. I met them all personally, whether it's Gropius or Nice or Zonos. You go right down the line. I met architects as early as 1947 in New York. We had a party for me there. There's something lacking.
So what made him better than the others?
Lloyd Wright?
Yeah.
He was a human being. He was a bastard of a human being. He was a great person. He didn't mince any words, any feelings.
So you, in one of your books, you really make Charles Eames out to be a prince of a guy. I can't imagine anyone better than you described Charles Eames. But you think Wright was better than Eames?
No. No. This is the point. I have received interviews since my books have been coming out by Taschen and Rizzoli and Clayton Press, whatever. Every time I'm interviewed, the same questions. Who is your favorite architect? What is your favorite building? What building haven't you photographed that you'd love to do? All these inane, stupid questions.
Oh, damn.
And I'm afraid without opening my mouth too much, but I'm very liberal. I hope your learning at School of Architecture is not going to waste. Because I have started a program in Los Angeles called 3 Deans and Julius Shulman. I made a proclamation to the deans that you cannot teach architecture. And I invited the 3 deans. Now, in fact, we'll enlarge that to 5 deans now. But 3 deans sounds better. We had a meeting last Sunday in which we discussed the simplicity of the learning process. I never learned anything about architecture. I met Neutra by remote chance through a mutual friend. I took some snapshots at one of his houses in the Hollywood Hills. He liked my photograph with a proclamation that he's never seen such good photographs of his architecture before. And I agreed with him. So he said, would you like to continue? This was March 5th, 1936. A long time ago, but my God, what a glorious date that was. He gave me other assignments to do before the day was over. He said, now Mr. Shulman, go up on the hill above the Silver Lake in Los Angeles. There's an architect by the name of Rafael Soriano who's doing his first house. I drove up to the hill where I located Soriano, and he was just finishing the house. He was sitting on the carpeted floor. The painters had just finished putting touches on the painting, new carpeting. He was just having some lunch. He said, sit down, Mr. Shulman. Have you had your lunch? I said, no, not yet. They had me a sandwich, and we sat there talking for about 2 hours. Turns out Soriano was doing his first house, the Lippitt's house, which was still one of the best houses he did, before he became too enamored of steel flat-roofed houses and a modular system. I don't know how you learn the architecture here, but for God's sake, don't get stuck in a modular system. Don't get stuck with a flat roof. Don't get stuck with nothing but in your own soul and a little heart if you have a heart. Mr. Wright said, I can't stand my clients. And I knew many of his clients personally. It's understandable. Wright was extremely expressive and concerned with good design. But the tragedy is, which happens today, that's why I carry this little book with me. His name and address is in notes, right, Lloyd Wright houses in different parts of the country and visiting, and comments from people. Why, as some people call, as I told Mr. Wright when I met him at Taliesin, I spent 12 days with him at Taliesin West in 1950. I said, Mr. Wright, I've met people who claim that they know you and they call you a belligerent bastard. His response, very simple. He said, as if disregarding my statement, he said, Mr. Shulman, you're a young man, which I was at that time. He said, you're too young to know what a belligerent bastard is. I may be a belligerent bastard. He repeated that phrase. But remember, most people who came to me, who went away murmuring to themselves, why is Mr. Wright such a belligerent bastard? Hell, he said, I'm not a bastard. I'm a good human being and I do good architecture. That man's drawing, by the way, on a side subject here, is everyone here into computers?
Oh, you bet.
But don't say that, I could better. Come on now. In my early days, I met Gehry one day at his home where he has a T-square, triangle, French curve on the table, drafting table, working with George Agron, one of his partners. At that time, he waved to me and his friend who brought me to meet him. Wait for a few minutes. George and I are just putting together something. One of our clients asked us, could you please give me what is equivalent to 10 inches, 11 inches more space in my dining area? I'm willing to sacrifice something in my master bedroom. He and Gehry had their T-square and pencils and tracing on the tracing paper on the drafting board, talking to each other. His request from the client was simple. Can I please have 8 or 10 inches more space? Now today you bring out a computer, I mentioned, wouldn't you? I don't know, see, I never had a computer in my life, never will have it. I'm too old for that. I'm too smart for that. So they traced lines back and forth with a ruler and a pencil. Erased it. No, that's not right. Suddenly George Agron explained to Gehry, Gehry, hear this. If we took X from here and put it on Y, take Z down there and there, here's the answer. Drew a line. It took about half hour, 40 minutes of tracing on a piece of paper. The prospect of giving a woman client 8 inches, 10 inches more space. How many architects in this world today, first of all, know how to draw on a piece of paper? Now let's say that they know how to draw and use a T-square and a triangle. It's fascinating what's happened in my own lifetime. Before I met Lloyd in 1936, I've been going to university, UCLA and Berkeley for 7 years. I owe the University of California a lot of money because I never registered. I just audited classes. Till that fateful day, I woke up early one morning and realized it's time for me to go home. Within 2 weeks, I met Lloyd and became a photographer.
So, had you photographed before then? I mean,
Yes.
was that a hobby?
No, I had another blessing. When I was 23 years old, my older sister gave me a little Kodak vest pocket Kodak camera. And I found for 3 years, from 23 to 33 to 36, that period of time, I wandered around the campuses, UCLA and Berkeley, taking snapshots of anything that crossed my path. I just became interested in photography as a hobby. A press in Portland, Oregon did a very successful small book about my work as an amateur photographer. But between 33 and 36, when I met Montreux, I had no indication what I was going to do with my life. Fortunately, I've never made a commitment. Until that day I met Montreux, 2 weeks after 7 years of drifting around doing nothing. So I'm going to ask all of you collectively in other ways, why are you here today? Is there anyone can tell me why you're here? First year or graduate student? Well, one comment, that's all. Why?
Be an architect.
You want to be an architect? Is that what I heard?
Yeah, to be an architect.
But what's an architect? How would you identify yourself? The moment you, who asked that question? All right. How would I identify? That's a nice color you got there. I like that. How would you identify yourself as an architect?
Well, as an architect,
When you graduate?
when I graduate, I want to create the space that people want to stay in and live in.
Create the space that people want to stay in and live in.
Do you make a living as an architect? That's good. You're going to join the ranks. The young lady I asked that same question to in my USC class, she said, in response to her question, and my response to her, I want to do great buildings. I pointed my finger at her. My God, lady, do you realize, young lady, the world is full of architects who are starving, who would bless your little toes every morning if you can tell them how to do a great building. How can you qualify yourself, even sitting there, desiring to be an architect? That applies to all of you. It's a tough business. That's why I became rich by not being an architect.
Making money off of architecture.
No. I made money for the architect.
That's true. So I want to talk a little bit, you talked about Gregory Ain and Neutra and that crowd in Southern California, but you also photographed a lot of architects in Texas, or a fair number.
All over the world.
So,
45 states.
do you remember Garland and Hillis in El Paso?
Of course.
You photographed a lot of their work.
In El Paso,
Uh-huh.
of course, Tufts.
Uh-huh.
Tragically, these people didn't know, we talked about that today. You'll never be an architect until you get yourself a good camera. It can be digital, digital is fine. But your digital camera must have a wide-angle lens. We stood outside the AT&T building on the campus here off the hotel.
Right.
And I thought, when they told me there aren't any modern buildings on the campus, which it turns out wasn't quite true, but just about was. I said to the architect with me, 3 architects, let's talk about your careers. And one of them had a digital camera without a wide-angle lens. How can you possibly photograph the entire building? So I told them now a little incident which occurred when I was in Kyoto, Japan. I was walking down the street, Garden Street one day, and I saw a man in a little workshop in his garden alongside the street. Chop, chop, chop. He's working on a piece of wood. He was crafting a carving on a workshop table. alongside of him, in a neatly arranged row, were a row of chisels. They range from 1/8-inch chisels to 2-inch wide chisels. And as I was watching him, I was on the sidewalk, he didn't see me, I was watching him. He kept changing the chisels. I said today, as I say all the time to young people, if you want to do photography, get the right size chisel, as this craftsman and field tools do. Today we had the wrong lens on this camera, didn't get the wide angle view of this hotel view. You must have the proper tool. Learn to take your own photographs. There are many wonderful photographers around who you should be able to talk to and work with. But give them a background, you know, a little bit about photography and photography purposes of photography, how to use the image that you can create for yourself, and a good image of your work. Don't wait until you graduate high school. With Bruce Goff, we have classes for his students on how to photograph a model. And we taught them how to photograph this wonderful chapel model, which was never built.
So did you ever see architects' photographs that you thought, that's a particularly good photographer?
Oh,
Some
yeah.
architect, like
Yeah.
who of the people you've?
Oh, George, anybody. There's no such thing as identifying names. Because I've met so many architects in my life. Most every architect I met did have a camera of some kind, or usually a small 35 on it. And most usually the wrong lenses.
So Charles Eames was actually kind of known as a photographer.
Well, Charles Eames was, as I say, he was a prince. He knew everything. He was great. He did motion picture work especially. But his still photography was especially good. I trust that all of you, if you don't have a desire, to run out, get yourself a wide-angle lens camera, get a lens with a zoom lens so you have a variation in compositions as we did today. We discovered there are 3 or 4 very handsome buildings on the campus which are modern. And we started taking photographs of them. I think we made progress, looking and making compositions. How do you prepare an element of transferring the image of a building to a sheet of film, to the desk of an editor, publisher in New York or Chicago or Berlin or London? My business has been based on literally, physically carrying my film, my prints, all over the world. That's why so much of my work is published.
So do you think it's a good thing, the degree to which media, and especially there's some media people who make decisions about what buildings get published, what photographs get published. Talk about people like John Intenza or media people and the role they play in all that.
Tragically, maybe fruitfully for me, most architects, most publishers, most authors, most editors do not know nothing about photography. They get on their desk a set of photographs. They have their advisors who tell them good or bad. A few of the architects in New York, architectural editors, are good, but they have great staffs. And when they review a photograph, a set of photographs, as occurred by a major publication in London not very long ago. Somebody I know was there, attending a meeting. One of the editors exclaimed as they were compiling a set of photographs which they had got from an institute in Amsterdam, Holland. this man exclaimed, "That's a real Shulman," to one of my photographs. It turns out on investigation, it was a good photograph. All my photographs are good, there's no question. Unless you can feel that you have executed a design statement, which is lacking in most schools of architecture. My contention that you cannot teach architecture holds forth very strongly until you have learned how to take the photograph. We went into that today. Instead of walking around the campus, I think we did review 3 or 4 buildings, I think. Didn't we? Was it 4 buildings today? 3? 4 buildings? I forget how many we saw. Whatever we did, we analyzed them from all sides. When the buildings are completed, some are being worked on now, some are being landscaped. I'll be back this way again. I'll be in Oklahoma in April. I may come in, have a meeting here with a workshop with your students. How to photograph architecture. There's nothing mysterious about it.
So give us a few tips here. For instance, some of your photographs have people in them, and some don't have. How do you make the decision about whether to have people or not have people?
You go back one step. This room full of people is a monstrosity. It's ugly. Look at this. I photographed Dr. Schuler's Crystal Cathedral in California without people, when it was empty and brand new. Matter of fact, that was a day that Phil Johnson was coming to speak to the architectural students. And he was on the platform, on the podium with Dr. Schuler to get ready for his program. There were no students, architects, or interior designers had come in. It was early in the day. The room was empty, this vast, wonderful Crystal Cathedral, which I photographed. There's a large print of it in Dr. Schuler's office, in his wall. One day, someone said to Dr. Schuler, "We have some kind of holiday coming up soon. Why don't you have Shulman come back and photograph the entire project with 3,000 to 4,000 people in it?" That picture I took that next weekend was a mess. I never used a person. Too many people. People would spoil it. The photograph I took many weeks before with Dr. Schuler and Phil Johnson talking to each other on the podium in preparation for a program. That's all we needed. 2 people, not 2,000. So I say this to answer your question. I use discretion. Sometimes I grasp somebody just walking in or through a building. Very incidental. But not loud numbers of people. Like the girls of the Piercone case study house number 22. We have 2 girls in there. That picture is the most widely used photograph in the entire world of publication history. No architectural picture in the world has ever appeared in every architectural book and magazine on every continent. There's that one picture of the 2 girls of the Piercone house.
So who were those girls?
They're the girlfriends of 2 of the architects who were working with Richard, with Philip Piercone. They wanted to see a house. Their boyfriends were raving about the house, so they came after work. They were going to come, and they said to the architects, "That's all right. They won't let us soak in. We're going to work into the evening." So I asked them to tell the young ladies to dress nicely, which they did, comfortably. They sat there while I was outside photographing the house, the outside looking in. They knew I was outside, they didn't know I was photographing the house. They thought I was photographing the house from the outside. They didn't know I was looking in through the house. It's all glass. Most people don't know nothing about architecture to begin with. That's why Frank Lloyd was so angry. He should not have accepted those people as clients. You should nurture your clients. You should learn this. We did that with Steve Ehrlich. We attended a meeting at his office one day for staff, 12 or 14 people. I asked Steve, you have clients, can you have a husband and wife come down to a luncheon meeting at your place, you bring the lunch on a big conference table, we'll all gather around talking about what it's like to be a client. We had the most delightful meeting. Something architects never do. Steve Ehrlich himself was a great architect, one of the best.
So,
Steve said to me that moment when we came into the room and the couple were sitting at the table having lunch with all the other staff members. He said, this young couple, one of my new clients, have agreed to come and meet with my staff because up until this moment, no one in Steve Ehrlich's staff had ever met a client. But a hell of a way to do an architectural job. Steve never thought it was important enough. I changed that because as a result of the clients being there talking to us, our staff members, questions and answers kept coming back and forth. Amazing. Afterwards, the client said to Steve Ehrlich, Steve, I think as a result of this meeting, we are getting some of the best houses you've ever done in your life. Because I think we've got a cross-section of feeling and questions and answers from your staff, not just you, your chief designer. Which takes us back to the School of Architecture. Where is the contact? I ask you. Where is the immediate contact? When A.Q. Jones was dean of the School of Architecture at USC, he had students coming to his personal studio at home for conversations at selected times to answer personal questions about the learning process, how to become an architect, what's involved. And this is the tragedy I've observed in architectural schools all over the country. That's why I started my program with the Deans of Architecture. It's going to be recorded, and one of these days it will be announced formally as part of the educational process of teaching architecture, which I say you cannot.
right. So, did you ever photograph a house that you thought, or a building, that you thought, you know, there's something about this that you can't capture in a photograph?
Me? What is there about space? Look at this room. I see a half a dozen wonderful compositions here already. All of it or segments. With and without the students. Preferably without the students. But I would place them in groupings, including you up here on the table. The proper drawings, models here. We'll do that when I come back for a field trip. Will these students be here for next spring, April, May, March?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll be in Oklahoma April to June next year for a exhibition and lectures.
Right.
That's not far away,
No.
even though you beat them.
Right.
Okay. Now,
So let me ask another question. Have you ever photographed a building and you look at the photographs and you think, you know, that they look better than the building really is?
of course. Why? Because the architects frequently see my finished photographs. When I take a set of photographs of a project with an architect or for the owner of a house, I use a 4x5 camera, and the finished photographs were delivered to the client. 11 by 14 inch glossy, elegant prints. We have a wonderful lab that does my work. And when they open that box up, 11 by 14 prints, you should really spark on the conversation. The architect is there and the owner is there. The architect and the owner are sitting there looking at my prints, and I'm sitting here like a prince. Well, that's called me a great photographer, and I agree. The architect then speaks up. He said, Julius, George and I are looking at the prints here in Hill's Opal print. We both agree. We don't recognize it on the photograph. It's a large house in Montecito near Santa Barbara, California. 2 stories. The owner said, I come down from my bedroom upstairs in the morning for a cup of coffee or breakfast before I go to work. He was an architect. So I don't recognize this photograph. I took it from the far corner of the living room where he hadn't walked through, he said, for months. Upstairs, downstairs, he walks down to the kitchen for his breakfast. He and the architect have never stood in the far northeast corner of that living room. Yet it took 2 years to complete the plans. What's wrong? Tell the audience.
What's wrong with that?
What happened? They
Well-
didn't recognize their own baby.
Because they hadn't really experienced it. They hadn't really experienced it, I guess.
That sentence drastically wrong.
Uh-huh.
How is it?
I don't know. What's wrong?
They're so busy with the plans, with the execution. Much of it was done with computers, and much of it, I was told, fortunately, by the architect, we worked on paper, tracing, drawings. He never drew a plan execution from that corner. He showed a standard 1-point perspective architects like to draw, which is fine. He never stood in his own baby's house, the way I did, when I walked in without my camera.
So do you think it actually, you made it look better than the architecture really was?
No, whether it's better than that, not my responsibility. What I did was observe a composition which embraced the space of this room in a way that the architect wouldn't know where to stand. His own work. There's nothing secret, by the way. I must make it clear to all of you, because I'm sure all of you have some familiarity with photography. Texas does have a few good photographers, I know that.
Name
I'll go back to foreign history. Myself in Dallas. Myself, I think his name.
Yeah.
He may not be alive anymore. No one's alive. By the way, don't ever, every great architect I've known, they're gone. Whether it's Soriano or Gregory Yane or Lodge, of course, and Schindler. John Lautner had a memorial exhibit of his work at the Hammer Gallery in Los Angeles right now. Take care of yourself. Be careful as students. Now, when I went to university and high school, even as a student, even before I became a student, I was a gymnast. I worked out in gymnastics. I ran a half-mile track team every day. I'm 98 years old last week. I've never been in better shape in my life than I am now.
Yes.
All right, why? Because I took care of myself.
No smoking, no drinking, no.
Oh, I really like a good drink. And when they give me something to drink, I say, is there some gin there?
No, sorry about that. Some water.
Water's okay. Water's okay. No, seriously. Take care of yourself. Drink beer, yes. I love beer. I love it. I could drink any day. Hey.
Cheers.
You know how careful he is? Strong gin.
So I got another question about these architects that you knew in Texas. Did you do work for O'Neill Ford ever?
Oh yes, San Antonio. That was one of my delightful experiences.
And was he a good architect?
He was superb. He was a genuine architect. More complacent with the kind of architects I used to meet in the 1930s and 40s. In the early work. The early architects, whether it's Gehry or whether it's any other social architects. Harold Harris. You can go down the line of architects.
So you know, Harwell Harris taught here.
I know he did.
Did buildings here.
Harold was a good man.
Yeah.
Harold Harris was very much, unfortunately, by the way, group of us used to talk about successful architects. We had a meeting in New York City one day at some affair. A group of young architects and myself were sitting there discussing successful architects who had made it, and we started mentioning names. Almost every one of these young architects who became successful married a rich woman.
So here's the advice. Work out, take care of yourself, and marry a rich woman. Or me. And drink gin.
Well, the drink is not the gin alone. Any kind of drink.
Beer's okay.
Beer's great. Drinking is good for you. But don't be stupid.
So I got another question. We've been talking about a lot of dead architects, and you said all the really great architects are dead. Talk to me a little bit about your buddy Frank Gehry. Is he the caliber architect of some of these other guys?
Let me tell you how Frank Gehry began. Okay? Frank Gehry went to the University of Southern California. He registered in the early 1950s at USC because he liked to do ceramics. He got in a class, I can't remember the professor's name. He started doing ceramics, beautiful forms, beautiful colors. One day the professor said to him, Frank, your forms and your approach to the structure of a ceramic pot, whatever the form was, have you ever thought of studying architecture? This was in a student in a ceramic class. No, I hadn't thought about that at all. I'll tell you what, Frank. Soriano's doing a house for me just off the campus at USC. He comes every day at 3 o'clock. He has a driver who takes him to meet with the architect and the contractor during the progression of the house nearing completion. Would you like to come with me today? At 3 o'clock after classes today, we'll drive over together. Come over there, met Soriano. He walked Frank through the house. It was nearing completion. Frank was very much taken by Soriano, who in those days especially was quite a personality, very friendly, wonderful, warm person. Frank comes up to the professor and says, you know, I'll take you up on that question. After meeting Soriano and seeing the completion of a house that he's designing, this is like a big chunk of pottery that I normally do on a little table on my workbench, spinning on a wheel. Yes,
So did he end up being the caliber architect of Soriano?
if you will, not yet. If you will come with me, we'll go back to the registrar's office. It's early enough in the afternoon. We went back to the registrar's office, the professor, Frank Gehry. She checked all the records and books and his manuscripts. He got a temporary job, night job, beginning class in architecture at USC School of Architecture. That was in the 1950s. Look at Frank Gehry today. He's got billions of dollars on the boards from all over the world. If you ask me about what I thought of his work, that's not the point. It's none of my business. I don't pretend to be an opinionated person, but I sure know a good architect when I see her. And there aren't many. Frank had the courage, the initiative, the boldness, the daring. I can give you 6, 7, 8, 10 ingredients, which Frank himself didn't understand when I told him the same thing. Am I all those things you're describing? I said, yes. Frank, you don't realize. You have a good mind. It's not as good as mine, I said to him. But you created 2 or 3 buildings already, including the music side of Los Angeles. That's successful. It's tremendously successful. Not music-wise alone, but economically. The music hall is packed every concert. They never had that before in the history of music. There's something about his architecture which prevailed. Frank Gehry is one of a kind. Yes, he did a bad jazz music thing in Seattle, Washington. He did something in Del Mar, what's that college in New York?
Yeah.
Del Mar, across the Hudson River, upriver.
Or
Something like that, whatever it was. Okay,
Yeah, Cleveland.
yeah.
There's nothing.
So the point is, Frank is very human. He's doing a house for himself now, which is quite different from what else he's ever done. I wouldn't be able to answer any question. If you asked me, is he still the architect who did his music center and the other current jobs? And as he gets requests from every continent now, he gets billions of dollars on his boards. Frank won't go out of style. Frank is a great architect. Now, coming back to the 9/11 disaster, the World Trade Towers. The architects in New York, the high-rise architects, are all flocking around, trying to find out who can do the tallest building to supplant the World Trade Towers. These are not the kind of architects that Frank Gehry is. They're not the creative side, they're just doing it through pile of masonry. One of them wants to build a masonry pile 1770-76 to commemorate independence of the United States. That's not architecture. That's ego. Don't ever catch yourself trying to outdo someone else.
So on that topic, one thing that at least we get the impression that in the case study houses, all these really good architects, Saarinen, Eames, Soriano, Aang, that they were buddies. They collaborated. They had conversation with each other. No, not
No,
true.
absolutely not. They were loners. Buff and Hensman didn't talk to Kellingsworth. They didn't have to. These men are so capable. Don Hensman, Conrad Buff. These men created great designs. And I must admit, Gregory, John Latenza chose them for the initial case study houses. But John Latenza was guilty of one blunder. He refused to allow Gregory Aing to do a case study house. Gregory Aing was a very liberal person. His designs attracted the attention of many affluent people, some who weren't very affluent. In the 1930s and 40s and even into the 50s, there was a large group of communist cells formed all over the United States, all over the world. People were admiring what was happening in Russia with communism. Socialism, they called it, whatever they called it. It seems that Gregory Aing attracted the attention of some of the more prominent architects, or communists, shall we call them, in Los Angeles area. And he did houses for them, darn good ones. When someone suggested to John Tenzer that Gregory Aing was good at doing low-cost, available housing, that communist, absolutely not. He condemned Gregory Aing. Gregory Aing never did a case study house. A horrible tragedy. The case study houses by Buff and Hensman and the others, they're good works. They're all excellent. That's what made the case study house book so famous. Tasha published my photographs of the case study houses. And that isn't the success of architecture, but the success of a publication is having the proper designers.
So these people weren't necessarily talking to each other. It was just that John Intenza chose them all to make it look like a coherent kind of school.
He made an approach to them based on the fact that fictitiously, because in those days people didn't have much money, there weren't many clients enough to say to the architects that Tenzer was selecting. Here's a group of women and husbands who will meet with you and talk about designing a house for them based on certain things. Well, these people didn't come across. They didn't have the money. They weren't knowledgeable about architecture. Gregory Aing was not included because he had friends who were communists. But the architects were included, and that's why the success of the case study house was Pierre Koenig is a good example. His houses, even that house he did, case study house number 21, was sold in Chicago for $3 million. I wouldn't give you $3,000 for it. To answer one of your questions, it's a bad house.
The photographs are great, but the house is bad.
Photographs are magnificent.
So what's bad about the house?
It's a tiny house on a small lot, small rooms. It wasn't a good example of Pierre Koenig's work, but Pierre Koenig made it look good. Because the owner of the house decided to have Pierre come over and prepare the house for a few weeks, redrawing, replanning it, reconstruction. The house, by the time it was furnished properly under Pierre Koenig's guidance, And my assistant, 2 assistants, myself, came in with our equipment. We turned out a set of pictures when they were projecting a huge wall, as big as this wall here. In Chicago at the auction house, $3 million was bid, and sold the house. Small lot, less than a fraction of an acre. No swimming pool, no nothing. Photographically,
So the irony here is that those case study houses were meant to be prototypes for houses everybody could own. Lower income houses, you know, every man's house. And now they sell this tiny little one for $3 million. And do you think they ever had any impact on actually making better houses for everyday people?
no,
No.
of course not.
Why not?
Because it's obvious. When these photographs are being projected on the screen in the auction house in Chicago, that's a sad thing, by the way. I don't hate, I could say I hate to admit it, but I'd like to recognize, yes, my photographs are good. And when we project them on that screen, they are great photographs. The impact is dangerous. That house should not have been bid for $3 million. I wasn't attending the August at the auction, but a friend of mine was there who observed the animation of the audience auction attendees. He said he looked around, these people were pointing to the film on the scene on the screen. Beautiful, magnificent color photographs. That's dangerous. For an auction especially. When the auctioneer got over $2 million, he raised up the bid to 2.5, 3, 2,750,000, $3 million, laid it in the back. But anyhow,
So we're at we've gone an hour. Are you good to go for a little longer, or you think we need to shut it down?
I'll go for 2 more hours if I'm not
We're not going that long.
seriously, by the audience.
No, I think we'll go a little longer, okay? So I want to know. I want to talk seriously about this business of it's almost making architecture a commodity. That it's a look that you buy and it's got status, as opposed to architecture being something you live in and experience and inhabit. Is there something a little wrong about that to you?
Why is the case study house number 22 the most successful architectural photograph of a house ever done, ever published, on all 6 continents? That's it from the audience. You're students, you're learning all years here?
All years, freshmen,
Freshmen,
graduate
all the way up,
students.
graduate. So somebody there can speak up.
Why is that the most famous photograph? Glamour.
No, I don't buy that. There's no glamour. My wife came to see the house afterwards to see what made it so successful. She said, Julius, I was expecting, after seeing the photographs you took and learning of the success of this case study house number 22, I expected the millennium. It's just a house with 2 girls sitting there. Now, is that glorious? Glorification? No. What is it?
So I think actually it captures a kind of lifestyle. It's partly its setting.
Do we agree to that? I don't hear any comments from the audience, so maybe that's what it was?
You could imagine yourself there.
What?
You can imagine yourself there.
A exactly why the girls are there. I had the girls sit there in conversation. I was outside, they didn't know I was taking a photograph from the outside looking in. They saw me go outside with my assistants and set the camera and set the lights inside to illuminate the interior, as well as the exposing the light for the twilight scene of the houses in the distance, the view over Los Angeles. As Paul Goldberger, who was then originally architectural editor of New York Times Magazine, he published that photograph. He made a statement. He said, "This Julius Shulman photograph, for all of us in New York who've never been up on a hilltop looking down over a city, over Manhattan, now we all know what it's like to live in Los Angeles up in the hills looking over the city. That's simple. But the photograph conveyed the proper exposure, of course, the composition. We did the right thing.
So how long did it take you to take that photograph?
45 minutes,
45 minutes.
maybe it's the most.
Would that be typical?
Yes, I work fast. I have two great assistants. I work fast. My mind is made up quick.
Right. So also, I mean, clearly, what you have that other people don't have is you have an eye. You have an eye for seeing. Here's a composition that'll just capture that. And maybe that is something you can't teach. Do you believe that? You can't teach that kind of having an eye like that.
Is there anyone in this room who's in love with somebody? All right, good.
Yes.
He always be a lover. I love everybody. I have a great affinity for human beings. Wherever I go, I make friends. Whether it's a homeowner, an architect, a plumber, a carpenter, a ditch digger. We were walking through the campus today in a group of 4 or 5 men who were working on a construction company, having their lunch, sitting under the building that we're looking at. So we greeted them. They saw me walking through the people that were being pushed on a wheelchair. I stopped and talked to the men. I could still be talking to them. I want to know more about what they're doing. They're craftsmen, they're ditch diggers, whatever they're doing. You sit down and talk to people. You become one of the group that are working, making a living. Whether I make $100 a minute, or $1,000, or whether they make $50, whatever they make in a day's work, none of my business, and they don't care about me. But somehow you strike an affinity with people. Here's an audience. Look at the number of students here. My wife one time said, "Well, Julius, you get these great big audiences, standing room only. What are you here for? I'd like to hear why you're here. Somebody came looking for something."
What?
We're just a fan.
A fan.
What?
She's a fan. She came because she's a fan.
Bless you. But that's not enough. What about the rest of you? My photographs are beautiful. I recognize that myself. I'm very happy about mine. I can do no wrong. I walk into a room and I can create a composition that even my assistant, who's a good technician from Bremen, Germany, he's the best man I ever had in all my 76 years of working. But even he is stunned by my selection of a composition of a room, interiors or exteriors. I see things that even his experience he's never seen. And the architect who may be there will walk me over there and I'm over here. Why we have that difference? It's a blessing. If, as architectural students, Is there anyone among you who feel blessed with a certain feeling of ability? Can you detect it? Can the other instructors, professors detect it in the students?
Yeah.
Can you pinpoint them to them in your conversation with them? What's your contact with these students? How do you develop the friendship and direction as a professional?
How do you make contact with them? You have conversation with them.
How can you guide them if you feel they need support, that they have a certain talent?
You can encourage the things they do incredibly well.
All right?
Talk about the things that aren't so good.
But if you detect among these students, among all of you, I wish we had a little more participation in answering the simple question. Are there students in your class that you detect as possible architects? For example, I lectured a number of times at the University School of Architecture. The head of the School of Architecture pointed to me, Julius, see that man there, see that lady there, young lady? Some of these students come from all over the United States. We're very selective in picking out students, even for our first year admittance to Yale School of Architecture. Some of these Yale first year students are so talented that we feel are qualified to go out in the marketplace and do jobs. It's not because it's Yale, it's the means they have of detecting the potential. Is there potential here?
You bet. Yeah.
Do any of you see it among yourselves? I'm not modest. I recognize in my own photography, walk into a room, or walk outside the exterior of a house with my back towards a house, carry my camera, or my assistant carries the camera, and I carry a stroller bag or something. I suddenly stop, turn around, put the camera here, as if I had eyes in the back of my head. It's a blessing, but it begins from your application of your own work as students.
So Richard Neutra let you know you had that gift.
No, he didn't let me know anything. But Mrs. Neutra, his wife, said to me when I said, Richard looks at my photographs, nods his head. But period, you always express yourself about my photography, for which I'm grateful. You said, gee, these are beautiful photographs, Julius. Richard has never said, Julius, or Mr. Shulman, he called me. He said, Mr. Shulman, your photographs, you would never say they're beautiful. But off the record, when we're alone, he would nod his head, shake his head, and say, the only Shulman has a means of photographing my work that I can't believe myself. What better thing can a photographer hear among yourself? There must be some exchange among each other, students. You talk to each other. Is there anything in this audience, any person, any potential of somebody doing, not a Frank Gehry, not a Frank Lloyd, Wright, not even Soriano, I don't care who you choose. Does anyone in this vast number of students can raise your hand, let me know. Yes, I detected a young man, a young lady, in one of my classes does show talent. Is that possible that they can observe that?
Sure. So how many people think they've detected talent among their peers?
All right, so here you are. Get their name and address, quickly.
Okay, I think we need to shut down because I did say we wouldn't take too long here. You got something else?
There's a vast number of people standing back there. I don't want them standing around all this for nothing. Is there a question in the back?
There we go, some questions, yeah. Anybody got a question?
So you know everything. So when I come back this coming
This one.
spring.
Bill.
I have a question, Dr. Shulman. So you got through the first Great Depression all right. Do you have any recommendations for the next few years?
He said, you got through the first Great Depression, okay. You have any suggestions for the next few years?
No. I never had a problem in my life. It sounds strange to hear someone say this in our society today. I work, I produce photographs. Everybody loves them. Tashin's doing more books. I'm doing a book now on for children. Tashin's never done a children's book before. He saw my dummy for a book for children called This Is a House, in which I'm doing a book for children on showing how many different forms and shapes and colors a house can take. It's going to be one of the most successful children's books you've ever seen in your life. And the photographs, when Benedict Tashin's up in the studio 2 weeks ago, saw my dummy, which I did 10 years ago, but I put it aside, waiting for that one moment, until he saw the dummy, before I make for Benedict Tashin, never. Suddenly I sensed that someday someone's going to find that dummy and publish it. He's publishing it sometime next couple of months.
That's great.
So if you build yourself in your own summarization of your own talent, don't you all feel that you're capable of why you're here at the School of Architecture? Is there some message that's being portrayed? Do you see that?
About what?
Can they make good art? Not good architects. Can these people? It's a great profession. I wouldn't give you 2 cents for it, that's all right. But seriously, as a profession, do you observe any talents here?
You bet. A ton of talent.
Do they know it? Yes.
Yeah, they know it. They know they're good.
Is there hope? What else can we live for except hope? My life is predicated on hope and love. I've had wonderful communication. I received 3 doctorates last year from 3 different schools of architecture in Los Angeles. They have observed something about my photography worthy of an honorary doctorate, which I was glad to receive, and I spoke for graduation at the California Institute of Architecture in the San Fernando Valley.
So any other questions before we split here? Yeah.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about the decision between black and white and color?
Decision between black and white and color. How do you decide to shoot in black and white or in color?
Today, color processing and color photography has been so well received and prosecuted, that every photograph I take, I've done with black and white. My career has been based on black and white photography in the early years before color became practical. But today we do color, and they would take the same composition in black and white film. We do both because some magazines prefer color, some magazines prefer black and white. We'd like to give the clients a choice so they can make a presentation, or I can make the presentation to the publishers myself. We give the editors and the publishers color and black and white. I let them make the composition decision themselves.
So you don't have a preference yourself?
No, every picture I take is good. How can I lose?
Yeah, I think that.
What about the role of women in architecture and in design over the years, or female assistants to the great architects? I was reading today about some of them not being very famous, but actually contributing significantly. So I was wondering about his observations about that.
So what about women who might have been involved in architecture in your exposure to it?
Some of the best architects I met were women. In terms of talent, creative ability. One fault we must eliminate is asking such a question. In all honesty, to begin with, I love women. Some of my best friends are women. When I have a party, I'm always surrounded by wonderful women having their picture taken with me. And they always gather around. It's wonderful. And some of these women are very talented. Not because they're beautiful, but because they are still great architects. And many of them are a little more sensible than men are. Be careful. Those of you who ask questions about women.
So how about Wright Eames? Did she have much to do with the houses that they collaborated on?
Good question. Charles Eames was so overpoweringly creative. He carried the weight of the Eames name.
So how about Julie Eisenberg?
She was, no,
Sorry, go ahead.
Charles Eames was so good as a person. He worked like this with the two of them together. And she contributed vast quality to the interior work that Charles Eames created with his houses. She's an extremely creative woman, more than the average,
Right.
by far. There are a number of good architectural women.
So have you ever shot, or have you ever photographed Julie Eisenberg's work?
I've seen her work. She's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Not quite my cup of tea.
Yeah.
I wouldn't compare her to anyone else I know. She's okay. And the client she gets, she deserves it. That's all I can say.
Other questions? Okay, let's shut it down. Thank you so much.